All right, guys. Ryan D at ZZP here today, along with
Al.
It's always Al. Today, we're going to talk about the LNF and LHU platform vehicles and a little bit about the engine, just like we did with the LSJ, to give you guys some more information about the glorious Ecotec platform. So, guys, we're going to talk today about the LNF and LHU. First thing I want to do, kind of like we did in our other video, is kind of give you just a small bit of background on the engine itself. Number one, the LNF itself can be found in typically 4 different vehicles. It is in the 2008 to 2010 Chevrolet Cobalt SS and the 2008 to 2010 Chevrolet HHR SS. Also, it can be found in the Kappa chassis vehicles from the 07 to 10 Pontiac Solstice GXP and the 07 to 10 Saturn Sky Redline. All these vehicles come with the 2.0 LNF. So, also we're going to talk to you about what is the LNF. It is the 2.0 liter direct injection turbocharged with a KO4 BorgWarner turbo engine that GM came out with in the early 2000s, we'll call it that, before the 2010s. It is a very stout engine. Factory, it comes with about 260 horsepower, 260 crank torque on both ends. However, this was one of the first Ecotec chassis performance oriented, at least in the front wheel drive version of the Delta, that came with an automatic transmission, at least with the HHR SS. The HHR SS came with a 4T45 transmission, unfortunately, and it was actually rated lower from the factory. Depending on what you read, I believe the original was about 212 horsepower to the crank and about 200 foot-pounds to the crank. This does kind of translate to modding them and the like, so that's why the automatic HHR may be the worst choice, unfortunately, for making big power. But that overall, that is what they came with. So on the 2 Delta chassis front-wheel drive cars, you can actually get one of the options in the automatic, which can be great for daily driving or any other small thing you really look for.
I'll jump in there because our personal preference on which is the best Ecotec is obviously clouded in his direction. But if I were getting an LNF vehicle for a daily driver, as much as I'm not a fan of HHRs, I do like how they drive with the auto.
Yes, it's
if you are understanding the limitations of the trans and you just want a slightly pumped up daily driver, they are actually pretty nice to drive. When you're not asking a million horse from the trans, they shift decently, and they still get pretty good mileage.
Absolutely. It's a very stout car, just obviously tailor it to what you're looking for. On the other end, on the Kappa chassis, they still came with a 260 horsepower, 260 crank, power numbers in the manual versions. The automatic versions, I believe GM rated them slightly less. You guys in the comments will be able to correct me, but I believe they will rate them at 240 and 200. However, we all know through the auto trans that they all still make a little bit less than that. So it's one of those things that, kind of knowing you're getting the auto cars, there's going to be a few more limitations along the way. Now, the other one I want to talk very quickly about is going to be the LHU/LDK. Here in the United States, it really only came in one and a half vehicle, I'm gonna call it. So you have the 11 to 13 Buick Regal, specifically the turbo versions. You have the 2.0 CXL version, the T-Type, and then the GS and 12 to 13. Also in that year range, on actually the Delta 2 chassis, which is like a Cruze, you have the Verano. The Verano actually has 1 year, I believe 2 years maybe, of the LHU engine in it.
I went a surprising length of time not even knowing that the Verano existed.
Yeah.
Just because I'm so invested in the cars that we do work with.
Yeah.
And I really think that was a missed platform.
That was a very missed platform. There isn't as much tuning for it. There's not as many parts for it. But it's essentially a Cruze SS.
Right. And the size of the vehicle with the power potential of the engine, especially if you do block upgrades, which we'll get to later, like that could have been a really, really fun daily driver type platform.
Absolutely. And it's a very, very missed potential.
And they're comfy.
They are very comfy. Very comfy. But it's missed potential in a very niche, small car. So if you guys are looking for a cool daily driver, there are Veranos with LHUs out there. And
F40s.
I believe they have very even rare ones that came with an F46 speed too. So like an F46 speed.
That's the crazy. That's LHU, why I was saying it was a missed opportunity because it had it right there.
Yeah, had all the good stuff with it. So obviously we're talking about the cars that are here in America. Like you overseas guys, the LHU, LDK, and stuff came in so many vehicles. Like one of my personal favorites is the Astra, the Opel Astra OPC J. It's this cool hatchback. If you guys haven't seen one, look them up. It's cool hatchback.
It also came in the K kit car, but they swapped it to port injection.
They did, yes, which is so strange.
They knew what they were doing.
Downgrade. So you have a lot of overseas Opels. The Opel Insignia is essentially the Buick Regal GS from over here. So you guys
also was in a few years of the Opel GT.
The Opel GT is the Saturn Sky here. So overseas, there is a ton of cars at the LHU/LDK/A20 NFT.
I'm a big fan of the Opel GT. I wish that had been a form of that had been released over here.
Well, the early Opel GT is the Saturn Sky. There is that too.
Well, I mean the bumper.
The bumper, yeah, the bumper is super cool.
Yeah, I like it.
So, guys, that's just a little bit about what vehicles that these can you mostly find these cars, these engines in, to give you an idea of, hey, I'm looking for LNF. What specific year range in cars do I actually look for to get all this greatness in this engine?
Oh, you forgot the most overrated LNF ever.
And that is?
The Fisker Karma.
Moving on. So, guys, there's a few different ways on how to identify an LNF. Me and I are going to kind of bounce back and forth here, just kind of spitball, but a lot of it is going to be the intake manifold. The intake manifold has a very odd kind of half circle but slope design.
It's very unique.
It's a very unique one to it. So when you see an LNF intake manifold, it's either going to be an LNF or an LHU almost 100% of the time. I don't think any other platform or car shares the same intake manifold with it. It's a cast piece. The throttle body is underneath it. Has all these sensors and stuff on top of it. That along with the valve cover. The valve cover kind of crosses over. Then obviously the addition of a turbo. I believe all the LDK, LHU, and LNFs, they all came with the BorgWarner KO4 turbo. Very, very, very stout turbo, especially for a daily driver. Makes a ton of torque. Without getting into too many of the technical details of it, they add this turbo because the car makes torque very quickly. I believe the rating of 260 torque was actually made at 2,000 to 3,000 RPM.
I don't remember exactly, but it's obnoxiously low.
Yeah, it's super low, so it makes a ton of torque, really, really low. But that's because it's a small turbo that spools really quickly. Now, the trade-off is you don't have as much higher end, so most LHUs and LNFs will die off for about 5,500 RPM. You still got RPM to go, but the power that it had when the turbo was in its efficiency range isn't really there.
Yeah, like a lot of people that are newer to turbos will say something along the lines of, well, why don't you just give a fast spooling turbo that can actually provide the power on the top end? And it's like, yeah, I wish it was that easy.
If it was that easy,
you have to pick one.
Yep, guys, if it was that easy, GM would do it from the factory. You can have a full power band with it. But
they did what they did because they weren't building a race car.
Yep.
They were trying, and you can see this especially with the newer wave of very small turbo engines that GM has out. They're trying to get as close to an NA feel as they could.
Yes.
And the tangent a little bit, they actually got really close to that with the Cruze and Sonic.
Yep.
Because we had someone that was here and had a Cruze, didn't know that it was turbo.
Yes.
And like from the factory, they spool so quick that it is so seamless.
Yep.
But you run into that insane limitation try to get anything out of the top end of it. And also, I know that the 1.5s and the Blazers operate very similar. Similar. Even with someone experienced with performance engines, it's difficult to feel the turbo because they respond so quickly.
But what's cool about this is it gives you a lot of ability later on to then modify it more and get more out of that turbo, because obviously they want to keep it in a very safe range, not really lean on the turbo at all. And that was the beauty about the LNF is that there's a lot more power to be gained just from things like tuning by itself.
Oh yeah.
So the easy way to identify them, they all have coil-on plugs on the top. There are the very noticeable intake manifold. Obviously, the fact that it has a turbo on there, right in the back near the firewall on pretty much all the platforms. On the Saturn Sky and the Pontiac Solstice vehicles, you'll notice the turbo on the passenger side, pretty much ready to go right there for you. So very easy to notice the LNF. It's something you kind of can't really miss. It's super noticeable. It's kind of unique among the Ecotec chassis vehicles that you're gonna really run into. So next we're going to talk about kind of how the LNF overall was really developed. Now we're going to have Al talk about that.
Now this is something that is kind of difficult to actually find concrete data on, and a lot of my knowledge is based on knowing people in the industry that I've had conversations with. And from what I have gathered, the LNF actually was in development before the LSJ. When the LSJ came out, its only purpose really was a temporary placeholder because the LNF was nowhere near close to ready yet. You can kind of see this when you start getting really into the technical aspects of the LNF because it operates very, very differently than all the other Ecotecs. You get into issues, not really issues, but you end up in a situation where, say you take an LNF head and throw it on the flow bench, the numbers do not add up to the amount of power that the engine produces. And there are some pretty easy things that you can do to try to go, oh look, we found a magic bullet, we got a ton more flow out of the intake, and then you put it on the car and all the power disappeared.
Gone.
The science that goes into that, the combustion of that engine, is very, very important. They every single time will outpower their flow numbers when compared to any normal engine. And if you try to tweak that, it almost never goes well.
To piggyback on that, that is why Alice is talking about porting the head. We've had people in the past port the ever-loving snot out of these heads and lose 80 or more wheel horsepower. It's been done. The dyno has been proven numerous times. We know the magic line where you can port just a little bit and not lose the important parts of that. That's why we offer port ahead for the LNF and the LDK, because we know that specific line of how far you can push it before you to gain some and not lose any.
And it took a lot of failures to find that point.
Yes. All right, guys. So now, we got a little bit of history on the LNF. Let's talk about what they can kind of handle stock. So there's going to be some problems that will come up for sure with these, but overall,
blocks are trash.
Essentially, yes, as everyone says. So, guys, as we know, Gen 1 and Gen 2 setups on the Ecotec family, they are actually all foam casted. That includes the LSJ, actually. So both the LNF and LSJ were foam casted. However, the LNF seemed to experience the cylinder support failure more often.
Right, and the reason for this, like, we complain about it and we talk about them being weak and we talk about it being a failure, but when you remember that GM was not producing this engine for us, it wasn't really, a failure on their part. There were some situations where there were some cooling issues with the LSJ Gen 1 engine family, and they redid some of the casting shapes around the cylinder support to provide additional coolant flow, which did accomplish the goal of increasing the flow and helping keep the temps more stabilized and keep things more cool. The downside of that was that it physically reduced the amount of material that is there to support the cylinders, and some of the thickness of the material between the coolant jackets and the crankcase got smaller in certain areas. So within the confines of what they were producing, with the power that engine was meant to produce, they are perfectly fine. It's not until guys like us get a hold of them and start finding the limits that, oh, now all of a sudden there's a new limit that we weren't expecting.
Yeah, and that's I couldn't have said it any better. Like that's a perfect way of saying it. Like a lot of people get the LNF crap for porous block, this and that, and some people did have them at low miles and other parts. But later in the next generation, the LHU that we're also discussing, they went to a sand casted block, which this was no longer an issue, and the blocks became stronger. Typical stock LNF power capability wise, usually the max you kind of want to go to, to give a horsepower number, even though obviously torque is what really hurts engines. To give a horsepower number, most LNFs are going to be in the mid 400s for horsepower and torque-ish. For failure.
They did carry over the rods and pistons are not identical to the LSJ, but they are very similar in their construction. The LNF rods and pistons are every bit as strong as the LSJ ones were.
Yep.
So for performance guys like us, it was pretty disheartening to find that everything else is good for really big power straight out of the box, except for the block.
Except for the block itself. And so in general, mid to low 400s on an LNF is kind of your stopping point, at least factory. After that, you're going to start looking at like a Gen 3 block and then rods and pistons, et cetera, et cetera.
And as Ryan was saying, if you set up your tune in such a way that you're not hammering the torque through it on the bottom end, you can stretch that a little bit.
A little bit, stretching.
and you may get like I know guys that have made over 500 on the stock bottom end on LNF.
Yes.
Can it be done? Yeah, it can be done. But you're playing with fire.
Yes, like you guys, and that's what a lot of people, and this is a very small tangent about even tuning the LNF or the LSJ or any of them. You can't go be on the knife's edge 100% of the time, because all it takes is one little time for something to kind of go wrong. That's why any good tuner will give you as much power as you can, then back it off a little bit to give you a safety net to make sure that you keep your engine together and the like. So yeah, so overall the stock block on a LNF can handle mid-4s. Now on the LHU, they kind of did it right, but they kind of did a few things wrong.
Yeah.
They did a trade-off. So before everything was at 450, they took 450 out of the rods and pistons and added to the block essentially.
Yeah.
So the block itself is great. Handle 500
and
with all
again,
day.
when you look within the confines of what GM was trying to produce, they didn't really do anything wrong.
No, not at all.
The stock engine holds exactly what the stock engine was meant to hold.
Yep.
We ended up with a significantly stronger block that solved the cylinder support issues, it solved the porous block issues, and the casting, being too thin around the coolant jackets to the crankcase. But they put toothpick rods in it.
Yes.
Now, with what they were doing, they're looking for efficiency. We can look back over the timeline of these engines and see that they've pushed more and more towards, fuel efficiency, and putting smaller rods in there reduces rotating and reciprocating mass, and it requires less energy to maintain a given engine speed. So we understand why they did it. It's just a real big shot in the foot for us trying to make power out of it.
Exactly. At least taking one off the shelf, putting it in there, just being good to go. So what is nice is this is one of those weird instances where the KO4 is not the worst option, but a larger turbo can be a better option.
Right.
We have numerous customers. We had a customer on a stock engine make 380 wheel on his automatic Regal GS, because he put a Z54 on there, and they make a little less torque than the KO4 that spikes at 2,000 to 3,000 RPM.
And that ties into what Ryan was saying earlier about horsepower numbers are what people are more familiar with, but torque is more directly correlated to the actual instantaneous force applied to the rod as the combustion is happening and it's pushing down onto the crankshaft. So when you switch to a larger turbo that's a little bit laggier, it automatically pulls back some of the ability to be able to slam the torque to it. So if you can find a sustainable level of torque, but now you have a turbo that's capable of maintaining that torque level out to a higher RPM, you can end up in a situation where you can make more horsepower on an LDK with the bigger turbo than you typically could get away with a KO4.
Now, we're not saying go out and put an S257 on E85 on these things expecting to last. That's still going to break. It's going to break hard. But something that's a little bigger.
We're specifically talking about working within what you have.
Exactly.
There are ways to get a little more out of it and still maintain some level of safety.
Absolutely. All right, guys. So now that you have a little bit of background on the LNF and LHUs and the like, let's say you're looking to get one. What are the kind of like your common failure points or stuff that's out of production, hard to get? What are going to be your pain points when getting into an LNF? So without getting too much into multiple suspensions, there's going to be a few different things you're going to kind of really look towards. Number one, the manifolds. The turbo manifolds themselves are currently out of production. The turbo manifold is like the main one. A lot of people replace them uselessly because stock they're actually a twin scroll, which basically has two of the cylinders going to these tiny little holes, and they actually kind of split it to actually kind of increase spool time. As really, really lame in terms of talking about it. But what it is they get, because the casting is weak there, they'll get a little crack in hairline crack in it. People replace them and throw the other ones away, which they are going to do that, and it stops no power from being made.
It's something that has to do with the design. I mean, if you had a full OE level lab that you could put the engine under constant load, maybe you could see a difference in spool time, but I can guarantee you it is so incredibly tiny that you would never notice the difference in actually driving the car.
Correct. Yeah, like it's so small. So in general, that's kind of one of the main things that's kind of becoming harder to find. It being out of production, the new engines themselves, at least for the LNF, are harder to find, but we still sell, as of this moment that this video is being made, we still sell new LDK/LHU setups for your vehicle. That what's awesome is they do drop right into the LNF vehicles. The only difference is actually the head slightly. The exhaust cam is longer because the LHU/LDK has a vacuum pump on the exhaust cam on the backside on the driver's portion of it. But we make a blackout cap for that, and you can just drop it right in your LNF HHR, Cobalt, or Sky. And we actually in the Sky and the Soul, so we put an LNF head on it to make sure it doesn't hit the firewall. So we make these ready to drop in for you guys. But
yeah, in the vehicles where it physically fits, everything else is completely interchangeable.
100%, like literally don't even have to do anything, just boop, boop, it's in there. So so finding other new blocks can be a little more challenging, at least for actual LNFs. Then for like the Cobalts and the HHRs, the ball joints are actually difficult. It's the only Delta chassis vehicle that has a 20.5 millimeter ball joint. Now we do our best to find them and to get them to supply them to you guys, but if those ever fail, that's a little more difficult because the LNF was set up as being the upgrades to these cars. So it has a bunch of small things that are kind of one-off. The knuckles are another one. The knuckles are not easy to find. Like if you get a good pair, hold on to them and don't let them go.
Yep.
Because if you ever have any sort of issue with the knuckle, granted, ZZPerformance is trying to change that in the near future with some upgrades. But for now, you may not want to get rid of those. Just kind of keep them to the side for yourself. It's a really good idea to do. Besides that, there's not really too many big known issues with the LNF. Just like the LSJ though, they do have timing component strains and guide issues. However, ZZPerformance yet again makes a part to kind of fix that, and so far to my knowledge we've had no failures with our new guide.
No, not with the upgraded parts.
So
upgraded
far
bolts, upgraded guide, make sure your tensioner's in good shape and you should be good to go.
Yep, like we've had people
the biggest advice that I can give to any Ecotec owner is do not engine brake from high RPM. This puts the slack on the bad side of the chain and just beats the crap out of things.
Yep.
Just use your brake pedal.
Yep.
Don't use the engine to slow down unless it's an emergency.
Yep. Do very, very much agree. So, besides that, you guys won't have too many problems finding stuff for the LNF platform stuff. I guess you can count the trans. The F-35s are pretty hard to find or get hard to find, but that's like just
But why would you want to find one?
Yeah, exactly. They're not that great, but then you can find the F-40 and do the F-40 swap and never have another problem again. Aside from that, they're fairly reliable. There's not going to be a lot of big pain points with them. Obviously, you have turbocharged stuff, and actually on the LNF, here's a really good one. The LNF's factory intercoolers and the factory map sensors are fairly poor. GM, to save costs, made the intercooler pipes and the intercooler intakes out of plastic. So what that happens is, especially with heat and cold expanding, contracting,
they get brittle and they go poof.
Yes, people have done it even on stock vehicles on stock boost. So what will happen is, like you say, you just drive along, you get into it, and boom, and you have no more boost, and your car drives really poorly because there's a massive boost / vacuum leak going on in there. So a big upgrade for these cars is just an aftermarket intercooler with metal intakes. It saves that from ever happening. And then the map sensors tend to fail. That's why the GM Stage 1 3-bar map sensors are there. I have not ever seen one actually fail personally, and they just do great. You never have to worry. You also get the GM upgraded OS. What's cool in general, the LNF was actually fairly supported from the factory. Like the LSJ had the Stage 1, 2, and 3 kit. The LNF had the Stage 1 kit, which is a tune and 3-bar map sensors, which jumped the power and torque by a lot. Not even taking sides, but it's more than the LSJ Stage 3 kit, really. So, power for power wise. So you can have this and not have to lose any of your other cool accessories like your air conditioner or anything. And just with GM Stage 1, put the map sensors on there and keep going.
Also, aside from just the GM Stage 1 tune adding power, there's also, without getting into real technical details, there's certain limitations within the ECU that are also taken care of by that operating system upgrade.
So, the GM Stage 1 upgrade with the map sensors is more than worth it. It's a reliability mod as well as a removal of limitations, and you have a lot of things on the LNF vehicles you can do. Now on the LHU, you come factory with 4-bar map sensors. It's not a problem. The LHU has used a different PCM that actually is flex capable and a bunch of other stuff. Not too many really big little pain points, failure points on that vehicle, like less than on the LNF. Like they don't really have issues. Maybe water pumps, but still timing stuff just like the other vehicles. The LHU and LDK, fairly stout vehicles. We don't have to really worry about too much going on there besides your stuff around the engine that we're not really focused on for this video. So guys, on the other end of that, we're going to talk about the good points about the LNF. It is really, really, really easy to make power on these cars, like good power. So obviously the factory, we're going to switch over to wheel horsepower numbers. Typically on ZZPerformance's dyno, a stock LNF will be between 230, 240 wheel horsepower, and 230, 240 wheel torque. So the numbers are pretty on par from drivetrain to wheel loss. Pretty on point. Typically with a tune, intake, downpipe like our ZZPerformance LNF Stage 2 package, any of that stuff, you're really going to get about 50 to 60 wheel horsepower over stock and about 70 to 80 foot-pounds. It's really, really easy to make power on these cars. You turn up the boost a little bit, you do all the proper things that ZZPerformance knows how to do with tuning. You get the stage 1 map sensors, your intake, your downpipe, upgrade your intercooler. You can go pretty far with that setup.
And that's one of the areas where I definitely will give the upper hand to the LNF when you compare it to like the LSJ, because if you're the type of person that just wants to do basic bolt-on parts with the tune and optimize your setup, LNF wins there hands down. The power potential of the factory components with just some slight upgrades is pretty significant for a small investment.
Absolutely. Like just even if you just want to get the tune, you're going to get most of the gains there, and you'll still have factory parts on there if you chose to have them. And again, the car is going to drive like a monster, like a LNF with a bolt-ons and a tune. It's still a very quick car. Despite what you see, all these 1,000 horsepower, all these crazy vehicles coming out with this horsepower, it is a very, very quick car. It's very fun. It's very capable. But even beyond that, there are easy things that ZZPerformance has made, like we have bolt-on Z series turbos and the ZFR turbos that use all of your stock components, even the proprietary flange for the stock turbo. We do it so you can bolt all your OEM stuff on and still be on stock engine still. So
yeah, it makes the upgrade path very easy.
Very, very easy with these cars. So as we talked about in our last LSJ video, once you get above that, then it starts to become about the same price for LSJ and LNF to both do this. But overall, they're really neck and neck. Despite what anyone on the internet is going to tell you, these cars, that's what makes the LSJ and LNF competition so fun, is that they are very close.
They're very close. Like they kind of go back and forth until you hit the limitations of like the factory block and internals.
Yeah.
And from there on, it's a pretty even race.
Absolutely, totally agree with that. There's some people say LNF has a VVT, so power band was really juicy on that versus LSJ is a little more peaky. But it's all fun, and again, both these platform cars are incredibly capable. Speaking of DI, Al, you want to talk about what's the benefits of direct injection from the factory standpoint, that the reason why they went to that?
So, boy, I could really tangent off on this, but I'm going to try to keep it fairly simple. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of what they've gone to over time with these engines is keeping their eye toward efficiency. And that is one of the areas where DI can really provide a benefit. You have much more accurate control over the fuel. Also, one of the benefits that I do like about DI is that it lends itself towards torque production. Now, without getting too detailed, basically the reason this is because on a port injection engine, you are pulling in air and fuel through the intake port. With the DI engine, you are only pulling in air. And at slower speeds, slower air speeds, slower RPM, where torque happens, you are not relying as much on the air charge inertia as you are at higher RPM. So that's where DI can kind of help, because you don't really need the inertia of the air-fuel mixture. You just need to get in as many air molecules as you can per intake stroke, then add the fuel into the cylinder. And so it's not some substantial like 50 foot-pounds gain, but it does make a significant difference over the entire power band.
Absolutely. And another thing about it is fuel efficiency. Overall, DI cars are fairly fuel efficient too, over some of your older, port injection stuff. So there's a few reasons GMs did it. Remember, their main thing is your fuel efficiency and getting those numbers, so various companies can look at them and say, okay, this car is getting this numbers, they can get good gas mileage. Right. And that's saying even with adding a bunch of power, LNF still gets fairly good gas mileage pretty much this whole time. It's pretty impressive overall, actually. Now, on the negative side of the DI stuff, without as Al said, with port injection, you have fuel spraying in with your air right up top on the intake. Now with these cars, you no longer have that. So usually fuel cleans off the valves of the car to actually keep them all spotless. The LNF unfortunately doesn't do that, so you'll get people kind of blowing up for being more detrimental than it is, but you'll get carbon deposit and carbon build up on the intake valves themselves.
Yeah, if you search valve coking, you'll end up finding lots of nasty pictures of this.
Yeah,
so even with a really good PCV system, there's still going to be little oil particles that make it through and have to be drawn into the engine to be burned. And when you don't have the fuel spraying on the valve to constantly keep them clean, those little oil deposits stick and they burn and they carburize, and over time you end up getting a buildup of carbon on the actual valve itself, which starts messing with the airflow, with the air velocity. It affects the tumble as the air is going into the cylinder, and in very, very bad cases where it's been neglected for a long time, you do start losing power in the car.
There have been tests out there where a customer, had the car brand new, kept it stock, and then over a period of time, he would dyno the car every year, and over a 10-year span, he lost about 20 or 30 horse. Cleaned the valves, all the power came right back. So
this is one of the reasons why I highly recommend our 5th injector kit. Even if you're not pushing a power level where it's necessary, just having that there so that it's spraying just a little bit every time you get into boost makes a significant difference on how long it takes for that coking to build up.
Yes, very, very big difference. And sometimes it can add many, many years of life to your specific engine. So there's a lot of good that very easy things to fix about that. So they're good size and bad size to direct injection. Me personally, I love the new tech in it. I love how much pressure you're putting in there. I think it's just really cool to see. Like, we'll see upwards of 3,000 to 4,000 psi at certain points in time.
Yeah, and in my opinion, and I've heard this from a lot of guys in the industry that I highly respect, like the perfect engine would have both. And you would lean on the DI more at peak torque, and you'd lean on the port injection more at peak power.
And some engines these days even come with both, which is really sweet. It's kind of like the best of both worlds, essentially.
Yeah, you can absolutely set it up to operate with the best benefits of both of those features.
Yeah. So, overall, again, just want to give you guys a little bit about DI stuff, just kind of let you know what you're getting into. And there's a lot of these things, like people walnut blast them occasionally, and then that clears up and physically cleans them. There's a few other ways you can go about it too. Take the head off, have it clean, put it back on, maybe do some upgrades like some studs and everything in there. So there are definitely ways to get around the negatives of DI. So guys, overall, just a quick summary about it. We talked about the negatives, the positives of it. You have a cool mid 200s wheel horsepower engine that sprays a lot of fuel and a lot of PSI in there whenever you need it. Very easy to make power with overall, and a very viable car for someone who is looking to either go fast and, with a fair amount of money, have a newer car, or someone's making just simple bolt-ons, have a turbo car, and be able to learn and get into the platform or go far with it. I myself, as you guys know, I still drive my 5 to 600 horsepower LNF all day, very, very often. I love it. It's super fun. Just drove it, through back to Fort Chicago a few times and plan on driving it some more. And it's been a car that's lasted me, I'm the original owner, over 10 years. It's a great engine.
As much as a LSJ diehard as I am, I'll give credit where it's due. And if you're the type of customer that's looking for something that you can get a very fun level of power with just doing basic bolt-ons and a tune, the LNF is the king of that market, hands down.
It is a really hard car to pass up overall. What's nice is some of the different suspension options and stuff transfer over between both cars. So say, unfortunately, you got an accident with your LSJ, you're looking just do a little something different, you have your LNF right there that you can easily do something with. What's also really cool about the LNF is that for 1 year only, it came in a Cobalt SS sedan in 2009, which is a pretty neat vehicle that unfortunately the LSJ never came in a sedan version, which I thought would actually be really cool. Some people have done the swap to it, but overall the LNF, it came in quite a few different vehicles too, and you have a lot of little niche, cool, rare options you can get from it as well. So guys, pretty much it's another great chassis for it. People race them. We make a lot of power with them. We personally, on our LNF, Matt Meekoff, our LNF tuner, has made 716 wheel horsepower. And what's really cool about that is that was on stock injectors before the Opal injector upgrade came out, on our fifth injector setup with a big turbo that, we have more technology today. So making power on these engines is still very, very possible and very easy to do.
Yeah, we see people complain about fuel limitations online all the time, but when you actually look at the numbers, there are more fuel upgrades available today than when Matt made the low 700s number many years ago.
Very much so.
I honestly don't understand what they're complaining about.
Yep, there is no complaint. Like guys, just to say, oh, the LNF has fuel problems. Nah, we've been there, done that. That's been there, easily rectified already. You guys can make power with your LNF. You're not limited. You can do whatever you want to do these cars and have a good, fun, enjoyable time. So overall, I think we covered most of the bases on the LNF. Yeah. Pretty good. If you guys have any questions, please hit that subscribe, like button. Follow us at ZZPerformance.com on all of our social, Instagram, Facebook. And if you have any questions, customer service at ZZPerformance.com. Once again, Ryan D at ZZP.
And I'm Al.
He's always Al. See you next time.